In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at collecting data. And first of all, the different kinds of experiments. So there's two kinds of experiments. There's an observational study. And in an observational study, the researchers simply observe behavior that's already happening. They're not controlling anything. They're just watching what's going on, basically. An experimental study is where the researchers create the environment of the study and they control exactly what's going on and what's being studied. So there's a lot more control in an experimental study. In any experimental study, there's what's called a treatment group and a control group. The individuals in the treatment group receive some special treatment that's being studied, while those in the control group do not. No participants would know whether they're in the control or the treatment group. So, for example, in a study to determine the effectiveness of a new drug, 300 people received the drug over the length of the trial, and 300 people with similar physical, age, and socioeconomic characteristics receive a placebo. So the placebo looks like the real drug, but it has no active ingredients. The researchers know exactly who's getting the new drug and who's not, but none of the participants would have any of that knowledge. In an experimental study, there's a good chance of the researchers arriving at a sound conclusion like whether the drug's effective or not, for example, as long as the experiment has these three characteristics. So first of all, control. The experiment is controlled so effects can be attributed to the effects being studied. Randomization. The subjects are randomly chosen, which eliminates bias. So the control group and the treatment group have the same characteristics. And replication. If someone else duplicates the experiment and they get the same results, then you have replication. If someone else duplicates the experiment and they cannot duplicate the results you got, then there's something wrong with the study. Now, apart from the drug study now, let's say you're designing a survey. And this is really an example of what not to do more than what to do. I'll talk about that too. So I have an example, says student work survey here with some questions. And I want to show you some things you're supposed to stay away from, largely. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit about what you should do. So first of all, you should never have a name on a survey. People aren't going to be as honest as if they could anonymously do it. Okay, so don't put a name on a survey. It's okay to ask whether someone is male or female. That's fine. So let's just put that right at the beginning up here. It's okay to ask people's age, but first of all, if it's a student work survey, you're probably not going to find too many people under 12 years old that are working. So that's kind of a wasted category. Notice the next category goes from 12 to 16, the next one's 16 to 20. So if you're 16 years old, which one do you check? Okay, so there shouldn't be overlap between the age groups. So you could do, and you should make them of equal size, so you could go 12 to 14. There might be some people that are 12, 13, or 14 working, like part-time. And then, so if you're 14, you check this one. If you're 15, you can check the 15 to 17. And then if you're over 17, like 18, 19, or 20, you could check one of those. And then this is over 20. So if you're 20, you would check this one. If you're over 20 years old, like 21 or 22, you would check this one. Probably no point in having age groups much higher than that, because then you wouldn't be a student anymore. This wouldn't just be a high school student. You could be a college, university student too. Next question says, do you think student workers should be unionized so their employers won't take advantage of them? So this is what's called a leading question. When you put, so their employers won't take advantage of them, that's leading the person taking the survey to answer yes. Okay, so that's a leading question. It would be better to ask, do you think student workers should be unionized? Yes or no? Okay, that's not leading anymore. A leading question tries to influence the person taking the survey to answer in a certain way. And if you want to know people's true opinions, then you shouldn't be leading them. Oh, I forgot. Where do you work? Notice that this list is pretty short. McDonald's, Subway, the Burger Scoop, A&W. Okay, it's a pretty short list, so you should make it a little bit longer. I made this up for my students, so those are the kinds of places they might normally be working, but there, of course, are other ones. I can't make the list completely exhaustive. So put an other category, and then they can list if one of the choices you give them isn't there. It would be a good idea as well to put here check all that apply. Maybe you have 2 different part-time jobs and you work at McDonald's and also at Walmart, so you could check both. Now, it's a student work survey, so it's really no point in having a question about, do you think it's important for students to go to church? Okay, so that has nothing to do with a student work survey. Might not even be ethical to answer that, so that's not a question we should have in this survey. Last question here says, does your employer treat you fairly? Now, there's nothing leading about that, but the choices that listed here are pretty limited. Disagree or maybe. Okay, so if you completely agreed, then there's nothing for you to check. So to rewrite it like this and give the person several different choices, like completely disagree, disagree, to have no opinion or neutral, agree, completely agree, or maybe a rating scale from 1 to 5 where you say 1 is completely disagree and 5 is completely agree, something like that, gives the person taking the survey more of a choice. So there's a couple things about making surveys things you should and shouldn't do. And that's the end of the video.